I'm Ashley Hoskins. I teach at Fisher Mitchell School with Amy Garish. We teach grade 5. After we came back from GMRI, we went into a classification unit, and I chose to do Spot the Difference, which is one of the games or activities that you can play um, through all my watershed neighbors. You can find all the resources you need on the GMRI website, but we also borrowed a kit from GMRI. So I'm going to take you through a little slideshow that I made after my class did Spot the Difference, and we'll begin. So I used this activity in mid-May. We went to GMRI in March, and like I said, it was through a classification unit. It's a really great and quick activity, and it can help kids get ready to use dichotomous keys, which I think is really fun, and the kids really enjoyed. It doesn't take very much prep work, and it can be done in a couple variations, and since the kids like it, you can use it more than one time, and you can try it with different things like animals or plants. Some prior knowledge that my students had before we started the activity was very basic classification of animals, and specifically differences between vertebrates and invertebrates, and the 5 well-known classes of vertebrates of the phylum Chordata. This activity could be done any time of year, but if you want to use tree samples, you need to make sure that leaves are out. So I had to wait a little bit before I could start with this activity. I wanted to do it at the end of April, but our leaves weren't ready yet. So while we waited for that to happen, I squeezed in a little activity with the kids so that they could start getting themselves ready to make observations. So my activity that I did with them is I got a little container of apples, and enough so each kid could have one apple. In this case, we had Granny Smith, but you could use any kind of apple that you want. I let the kids study their apple for about 5 minutes, and I let them take notes and make sketches of their apple. And after about 5 minutes, I asked them to put their apples back on a table, and I mixed them up. And then one by one, I had the kids go to the table to pick out their apple. And they were all able to pick out their own apple from the start of the activity, and nobody disagreed, nobody fought over an apple. And I shared with them that they were able to really make keen observations, and they were able to spot really small differences between these objects. So I mentioned that when you're taking a look at other species, it's really important to take note of these subtle differences. And I pointed out that some species like crabs, they have the carapaces, and they have different amounts of points on their shells, and on leaves they have sinuses, and the shape of the sinus could help you to figure out which leaf you're taking a look at. So it was a really good preview before we started the Spot the Difference activity. Students were really engaged throughout Spot the Difference, and that's because it's very hands-on. It's partner work, and it's a game. It can be really competitive, but it's really fun. And after 3 rounds inside the classroom using my tree samples, on the first day that I did this activity, I let the kids do one last round outside, which was really motivating for them as well. So the setup for this is it's very easy. You collect a variety of tree samples. You could also use pictures if you don't have samples ready. And you can find the activity plans for Spot the Difference on the Vital Signs website. When I was collecting samples of trees, I tried to get a lot of different kinds of parts of trees, like leaves, pine cones, twigs, and bark. I made sure that the twigs that I chose had buds on it, because that's one way to be able to spot the difference between species. I collected a few samples of the same species off different trees so that kids could see, when you're identifying, sometimes you have two of the same sample, or two of the same species from two different samples. And I created my own recording sheet so that the students could take notes on similarities and differences. And later in my slideshow, you'll see my recording sheet. I gave some room on that for some drawing. And clipboards are helpful in the setup of this activity. So when I implemented this, I gave the directions for what the kids were going to do, and then I set a timer for 5 minutes once the kids had one sample each. So each of the pair had to have their own sample, and after about 4 minutes in, I told them to tally their points. So this game, it involves, they have to have two different samples, and they're taking notes on the differences and similarities that they see between the two samples. And the reason it's a competition is because the kids tally up in the end to see how many more similarities and differences they had than their partner. So that's what I mean by tallying their points. And by setting a timer, it helped me to stay on track, and it helped them to move through quickly, and it kind of showed them that they needed to move at a pretty brisk pace. And because of the quickness, it was really engaging, and the kids weren't fooling around, they were just doing their job. So it was pretty awesome. Up in the top right corner, you can see an example of the sheet that I made with the same and different. I only gave a few spaces for each, but you could make more, or you could make it just a box without lines. And then I had the drawing space in the top so that they could remember what the samples looked like when I gave them their work back later. And you can see some kids working. They had a lot of fun. Some things to think about before you start is that students need to remember that they need to choose the same type of samples. So that was kind of a problem for the first round and into the second round for kids who maybe didn't listen the first time. If partner one chooses a leaf as their sample, partner two also needs to choose a leaf, not a cone or bark. So that was just something that my kids needed a couple reminders about. Students also needed reminders to focus more on recording similarities and differences rather than making their drawings. Some of them got really hung up on drawing really beautiful sketches rather than quick sketch. So just remind them what the purpose of the activity is. And I didn't do a round as a class, and I feel like that would have been helpful if I had done my first round all together, or had kind of a fishbowl of me and a kid doing the round. And the next time I would also do some pre-teaching of leaf parts so that they could be more scientific with their observations and the things that they were saying about their leaves. This is just some more pictures, and you can see more about the sheet, and it's hard to read this child's handwriting a little bit on the screen because it's light, but it was kind of hard to move them away from really generic kind of observations like small, or one is brown, or one looks dead. So I think the pre-teaching would help with that a little bit. And some general observations that I made is that while this felt like a really worthwhile activity, I think I need some growth to do on my own part with implementation of it. Like I said, their observations were pretty limited, and their vague descriptions kind of showed me that I need to do more on my end, and it might be good advice to somebody else to do that as well so they can have more scientific recordings. So while these observations weren't untrue, some didn't really feel so noteworthy to say on their papers. So my students needed more guidance on how to observe specimens in a meaningful way. Um, I wanted to try this activity again because the kids liked it so much, and I wanted to use animal species for the second time. So in on the Vital Signs website, they have species cards, and because I didn't have any like physical samples of crabs, crab carapaces, I used the species cards from the Vital Signs website, and I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I felt like it went good, but um, I don't know what GMRI, what you guys would say, Kim. Um, but it seems like they were able to still make great observations, and the species cards really lend themselves well to talking about invasive versus native species. And I was surprised that they took note of that on the species papers. So that was pretty cool to me. Um, and then after we started thinking about invasive versus native species, students were able to think about what would happen to native species if there was an abundance of invasive species populating an area. So that felt like it was a good way to take it a little further. I asked the students what they thought since I knew I was going to be reporting out about this, and they had a lot of really positive things to say. You could see their comments. A lot of them liked it because it felt like a game. Um, they got to be outside. They got to explore nature in a different way than they normally look at it. Some kids like the competitive nature. You can see that Cecilia said, I found an inchworm. So that was fun to see a little bit of life in the classroom besides our own selves. Um, I liked Logan's comment. I liked trying to find the differences in leaves and pine cones. Most people don't do that. So they hopefully will be inspired to take a look at nature on their own too and become a little bit more curious or inquisitive about their surroundings. And that was Spot the Difference.
That was great. I think using the species cards as a way of doing spot the difference. I mean, I don't know if Christine would have a different opinion, but I think that's fine, especially if you don't have any way of getting the actual carapace to use that. And to your point of them maybe not using as much scientific language as you wanted to, I think that would actually help them. And what the differences they might point out might have more to do with the scientific language around them. But yeah, I thought that was great. I love the activity with the apples and them having to look at the differences in apples and then have to go back and pick out their apple. Like, I'm not sure that I would. I just assumed you're going to be like, oh, and they all couldn't find their apple. I was surprised that they actually found their apple.
Yeah.
So that was great.
Okay.
So, Amy, do you have something different, or did you basically do the same thing?
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you?
Yep.
Okay. I did a little bit of that as well, but I also wanted to speak to the just some what seemingly might seem like a simple poster assignment that really brought some real deliberate connections and understandings, especially prior to the trip. And what I would like to hope maybe I can work with you to, I was trying to put together some images that would help to appreciate the posters, but that was a little tricky to do. I didn't know if people could see the text in the appreciate the drawings, but our hallway just came alive prior to the trip and after with all these posters. And I had an artistic crew in particular this year anyway, but they, I think what we found success with launching into those posters was just talking with them about what a system is. They just kind of brainstorming with them around, and they could come up with things like school system and solar system, bodies. Having had fourth grade science, they had some body systems that they were aware of. They even could relate it to in social studies with the triangular trade in terms of where different goods went at that time. between different countries. So that was really neat. And from there we could move into just ecosystem as well and seeing what their prior knowledge was. Having been on this trip before, it was just in general very exciting that we hadn't been that deliberate, I would say, in the terms of the pre-activity. So that was very exciting for me that before going we could start to have all these conversations. So again, they went into the ecosystem, kind of just seeing what their prior knowledge was, even just here in Bath, or what they could come up with. That kind of extended too into some conversation about what if certain parts of an ecosystem stop doing their jobs, how that might impact ecosystem. So having not collected a lot of data per se once we got to GMRI, I'm sure that those conversations impacted their visit, or they could then start to make some connections and kind of confirm their predictions in that way. And then from there, we did just launch into those posters, and we gave them access to that. We used their prior knowledge. We gave them access to the species cards as well, and then their motivation was or engagement went right up, and they even started doing a little of their own research as well. So a combination of those three sources, and then they knew that after the trip they could then add to their poster some with any new knowledge that they gained. But it was what seemingly seemed like maybe a simple poster project really was just what we needed. And again, it was neat, just the hallways, as I already said, came alive with other students or staff knew where we were going. So I would definitely just the power of the visual was great for them. And I liked how it got the vocabulary and the scientist language going in the classroom too before coming. Just so again, in the future, I would be excited to collect some more so-called data in a way, or just capture their conversations that much in a more strong way. But and again, so maybe I wanted to celebrate some of these posters with you, but maybe there's a way I can still share those, team up with you to see how we could best share a few of them. But
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, I would love to see them. That sounds awesome. And I like the fact that they had the chance to go back and kind of reflect and add more to their poster afterwards. If they missed something or if they learned something new, that they could go back and add it to kind of keep working on the same thing. I also love that you guys had them look at systems, not only within like the scientific context, but that it started, going into other disciplines too, that they were pulling them from things that they learned in history. They're pulling them from different grades, and that it wasn't just, ecosystem. So that's really cool that they kind of, I don't know if they went there on their own or if you helped them kind of direct them that way, but that's really cool.
Yeah, some of them did, but and even the post part about adding to the posters, a lot of that was them. They could kind of clarify what they had put on already, or had or knew what they wanted to add. So yes, that was just all around, just really improved the engagement and motivation of the whole experience. So yes.
Cool. Well, that's really good to hear. Well, it sounds like you guys did a great job. I've said this to, I think, every single group, because everyone always has a different story of how they've been working in the classroom and extending it. So I always love listening to these and listening to how people kind of take it in their own direction. So it's great to hear all the different ways and the different ideas that are out there. So thank you guys for sharing. I know that, especially given the time of year, that this is a very busy time of year for you, but I hope that you are almost done, if not done. Are you guys out?
We're done.
We're done.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Unless you guys have questions for me or anything like that, I think we're all set, and I hope you guys have a great summer and get lots of nice sun and relaxation, and hopefully the rain won't stick around for too much longer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.
You too.